You lock your front door. You latch the windows, you set the alarm. You go to sleep believing that your home is a fortress, a sanctuary where the world cannot touch you. But there is a flaw in your logic. You are trying to keep the danger out. You never stop to check if the danger was already inside. This is not a ghost story. Ghosts cannot hurt you. These are the true accounts of Phroggers. Real people who secretly lived in the attics, walls, and cupboards of unsuspecting victims. They ate their food. They used their bathrooms. And sometimes, they stood over their beds and watched them sleep. The Denver Spider-Man, October 17, 1941. Denver, Colorado. Neighbors of 73-year-old Philip Peters became concerned. Philip was a retired railroad auditor, a man of routine, yet he had not been seen for days. When the police finally broke down the door of his quiet home at 3335 West Moncrief Place, they found a scene of absolute brutality. Philip Peters lay dead in the bedroom. He had been bludgeoned to death with a heavy cast-iron stove shaker. The walls and ceiling were splattered with blood. But there was no sign of forced entry. All the doors were locked from the inside. The windows were secured. It was a classic locked room mystery. The police were baffled. They processed the scene, removed the body, and the house was locked up once again. But the neighbors kept calling. They reported seeing lights flicker on and off in the vacant house. They saw shadows moving past the blinds. The police returned, searched the house top to bottom, and found nothing. They chalked it off to mass hysteria. Months passed. The house gained a reputation as being haunted. In July 1942, 2 police officers were doing a routine drive-by surveillance of the empty property. They saw a figure on the second floor. Guns drawn, they smashed through the front door and sprinted up the stairs. They heard the sound of running footsteps, followed by the click of a latch. But when they reached the hallway, it was empty. They stood in silence, listening. Then, one officer noticed something subtle. A small rectangular panel in the ceiling of a closet had a smudge of dirt on it. He reached up and pushed. It gave way. He pulled himself up into the narrow attic crawlspace. There, huddled in the darkness, was a man. He was gaunt, pale, and dressed in rags that had once been clothes. This was Theodore Coneys. He had been living in the attic of Philip Peters' house for nearly 10 months. 5 weeks before the murder, Coneys, a homeless drifter, had broken in while Peters was out. He found a trapdoor to the attic and decided to stay. He would come down at night to eat Peters' food and drink his water. On the day of the murder, Peters had caught him at the refrigerator. Coneys killed him to keep his secret, then went right back up into the ceiling. He had been living above the crime scene the entire time the police investigated the body. The woman in the cupboard, we often think of these stories as relics of the past, but technology has only made the terror more documented. In 2008, a 57-year-old man in Fukuoka, Japan, began doubting his own sanity. He lived alone in a modest apartment. He would buy groceries, place them in the fridge, and the next day, they would be gone. Rice levels dropped. Drinks disappeared. He checked his locks. He checked the windows. Nothing was broken. He was convinced he was sleepwalking or losing his memory. Desperate for answers, he installed a motion-activated security camera facing his kitchen. The next day, he checked the footage. What he saw made his blood run cold. In the middle of the night, while he was asleep in the next room, a small sliding cupboard door above his refrigerator opened. A woman crawled out. She climbed down using the fridge door as a step. She walked around his apartment, watched television, used his toilet, and ate his food. Then she climbed back up and closed the door. Police rushed to the apartment. They opened the cupboard, a space meant for storing bedding. Inside, they found Tatsuko Horikawa. She had managed to fit a thin futon and water bottles into the tiny space. She had been living there, just feet above the man's head, for an entire year. She had never been outside. She told police she had simply found the door unlocked one day and decided to move in. The nightmare of 63 feet, the idea of a stranger eating your food is unsettling. The idea of a stranger tormenting you is horrific. In 1986, Daniel LaPlante was a troubled teenager in Pepperell, Massachusetts. He had become obsessed with a girl named Tina Andrews. When she rejected his advances, he decided he would not take no for an answer. The Andrews family began experiencing what they thought was poltergeist activity. Strange knocking sounds echoed from the walls. Furniture was rearranged while they were out. Milk would appear in the cupboards, and cereal in the fridge. The father, Brian Andrews, found writing on the basement walls in ketchup that said, "I'm in your room." They held seances. They believed their house was haunted. But the truth was physical. LaPlante had discovered a crawlspace behind a built-in cabinet in the hallway. It ran the length of the house. He was living inside the walls, and LaPlante was not just hiding. He was hunting. He drilled peepholes into the bathroom and bedrooms to watch Tina and her sister. He would emerge when the house was empty to move items, specifically to gaslight the family into terror. One night, the father, Brian, was out. Tina and her sister were watching TV. Suddenly, the channels began to change rapidly. They looked around, terrified. Then, a loud pounding came from beneath the floorboards. The girls fled the house to a neighbor. When the father returned, he grabbed a weapon and searched the house. He found nothing. But then, as he stood in one of the bedrooms, he saw it. A panel in the wall moved. A pair of eyes stared back at him. LaPlante was wearing a wig and face paint, dressed in the deceased mother's clothing, holding a hatchet. He burst out of the wall. The family barely escaped with their lives. Police arrived and found the crawlspace. It was filled with food wrappers, sleeping bags, and a clear view of the family's most private moments. LaPlante had been the ghost in the machine, the monster in the walls, proving that the scariest things aren't supernatural. They are human. These cases force us to confront an uncomfortable reality. We rely on the perimeter of our homes to keep us safe. We trust the locks. But a lock is only effective if the threat is on the outside. Theodore Coneys, Tatsuko Horikawa, and Daniel LaPlante proved that sometimes the call is coming from inside the house. So tonight, when you hear a floorboard creak or you can't find that leftover food you swore you saved, don't just brush it off. Take a look in the attic. Check the back of the cupboard. Because you might not be the only one home.